Okay, good morning and thank you, Susan. Yeah, I'm going to talk about fodder to manage weeds in the cropping rotation. The focus will be definitely on the southern high rainfall zone and work we've been doing at Southern Farming Systems on sites at Lake Bolac, at Inverleigh and a whole lot of farmer sites over a number of years. I'm presenting on behalf of Corinne and myself. Corinne did the earlier one. But the team includes, was headed by Cam Nicholson, includes Anika, Paradine, Jenny Creek and Simon Faulkner. So I guess you've got to ask the question of why we're looking at fodder crops in the cropping rotation in southern Victoria, the high rainfall zone. And basically we're fairly new entrants into the cropping system. We've come from a grazing background and there are still large numbers of livestock on most farms. So there's an opportunity there to use fodder within the farming system that perhaps doesn't exist on more of the conventional cropping zones. So just some characteristics before we roll into our own work on the weeds in the southern high rainfall zone. We've got a very long growing season with extended springs, which is great for yields, but also great for weed development and late germination. So there's a special set of conditions there. We often have lousy spraying conditions, wet, windy conditions that go on day after day, week after week. Often the paddocks are untrafficable or poorly trafficable and makes the application of herbicide in a timely manner pretty difficult. The raised beds are practiced across a lot of the region, you'd be aware, and they're great in terms of point of yield and managing waterlogging, but they're lousy in terms of having poor plant population in the furrows and the wheel tracks and poor herbicide incorporation in those wheel tracks as well. And we've been growing canola as our principal break crop for those 20 odd years that we've been going seriously down this area, and it probably is TT canola is probably 95% of our break crop. A lot of people have been experimenting or trialling pulses over that period of time, not with a great deal of good results. More interest of late in favour beans with new varieties and new agronomies, but still we're heavily dependent on TT canola, and that's quite frankly a recipe for disaster. And we've got increasing herbicide resistance, probably higher than any other area, and I'll just have a quick look at this. This is a survey work that you've probably all seen. If you look at the low rainfall zones of the southern Mallee and northern Victoria, the low rainfall zones, their levels of resistant populations versus the higher rainfall zone in the southeast and southern Victoria, you can see we're miles ahead. We've only been in the game a short period of time, but we've got much higher levels of resistance. And it gets even worse when you look at the results for southern Victoria from 2009. So in fact, if they were more current of the 2011 or 2012 years of the other two, we'd be significantly worse than we are there now. So with all that happening, we've got increasing herbicide resistance, a reliance on canola, only one break crop, and lousy spraying conditions. You know, you don't need to be Einstein to sort of work out where we're heading unless we can come up with some alternate weed control systems. So we need to go backwards a bit here and just think about integrated weed management in its purest sense, and that's sort of the theory of it. So if you'll bear with me for a few minutes, we'll just look at that because that provides the fundamentals of where we're going with our trial work. So integrated weed management recognises that no one strategy, especially herbicides, will control weeds over time. I think we all accept that. Weeds will adapt to any control strategy and become resistant. I think we accept that. But it's not only herbicides, they will adapt to almost any strategy because they'll change their timing or whatever. Herbicide resistance occurs naturally and is inevitable in all populations, and the integrated approach means a number of control strategies are required, and that's really what we're working towards, having more arrows in our quiver. In the southern high rainfall zone, common non-herbicide options are often difficult to implement. In other areas, things like narrow windrow burning or the Harrington seed destructor or inversion ploughing are quite successful. In our area, they are not as successful, so we can't rely on. If we can't rely on them, we need to have other options. And the other opportunities, I guess, are via the incorporation of livestock and competitive forage species within the systems, and that's what I'll tend to focus on as we go forward. But just a little bit more refresher about IWM. It's divided into tactic groups, and I'm sure many of you have sat through the presentations by Andrew Story and others on integrated weed management strategies. The tactic groups work on the seed bank life cycle, or the weed life cycle, with the first one being depletion of seed reserves in the seed bank, and this includes strategies such as inversion ploughing or autumn tickling in a traditional sense, killing weeds with herbicides or in other ways, and stopping seed set, that is stopping the seeds entering that seed bank at the end of the season. And typically in that we've got hay silage, grazing, manuring and spray topping. So they're the three we'll be focusing on in our fodder work, but also there's those other two that are obviously important in the full life cycle thing. So Corinne did some modelling earlier on to see whether how fodder systems might in theory affect weed burdens in a cropping rotations. And the RIM model, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, or the ryegrass integrated management modelling, demonstrates the theoretical value of fodder rotations for varying lengths in controlling weeds. And we looked at a number of scenarios. We looked at three scenarios. The first one was a typical wheat barley canola rotation over a 10-year period, just a business as usual situation where we had we put in best practice, we put in the herbicide efficacy that we currently have. We didn't assume that it got worse over those 10 years. The second one was we introduced the theoretical 2-year Persian clover rotation, followed by that typical wheat canola wheat barley rotation after that. And the third one we looked at was the 4-year loosen phase, followed by the typical crop rotation. So just to run through those quickly, on this one, which was the ongoing canola wheat barley rotation, we started off with a seed bank of 10,000 plants per square metre, which we sort of thought was pretty bad, but actually hadn't stopped your farming, that paddock. And as you can see, using the best practice, TD canolas, etc., basically it was business as usual. The seed bank went up a little bit, but at the end of 10 years, you still had a problem. Hadn't got a whole lot worse, but it certainly hadn't got any better. And I guess the reason it hadn't got any better, if you look at the infill line, which is the seed bank, because of carryover from year to year, we were never getting that seed bank down to zero, so we were never getting in front. You contrast that with the next one, which was the 2-year Persian clover phase, followed by canola wheat barley rotation, where we were taking all seeds out of the seed bank. Now, we were stopping any seeds entering the seed bank for each of those 2 years through I think it was a fodder conservation strategy, and then following up with a double knot. And you can see that gave us respite for probably 4 years before the ryegrass numbers started to build up, and then they were steadily on the incline. So a pretty handy strategy, 2 years in fodder. We then looked at the 4 years of loosen. Again, stopping all seeds, all weeds, ryegrass plants from setting seed in those 4 years, and dramatically different effect, where if you can clean the seed bank out of viable seeds and keep it that way, then obviously the prospect of weeds coming into the cropping system is reduced dramatically. So we sort of use that as our basis for developing our own trials. Okay, so before we move on to our trial results, just a quick warning about interpreting results. We've done a lot of trials over a lot of locations over a number of years, and the thing that jumps out at us all the time is how variable trial weed populations are from year to year, and how they fluctuate across trials, across sites and across years. And you need to have a control within every trial system to be able to compare it to, rather than just comparing trials with trials. And even though the results may be statistically insignificant, often you'll have an insignificant result even though you'll observe quite strong trends within a trial. So just a word on that, proceed with caution. We're trying to sort of have a mass of trials that deliver consistent messages. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but just be wary about taking one trial out of context. Just a refresher, we'll be looking at those three tactic groups as we move forward. So our trials, looking at tactic group 1, depleting seed reserves. In a fodder system in the southwest on a mixed farm, it's highly likely or almost a given that there'll be animals in the system at some point in time. So we need to be sure about the impact of grazing on the weeds. I'd quizzed a lot of people whose opinion I respect over the years and seemed to get a variation in messages as to whether the action of a trampling hoof would assist weed control, maybe by stimulating germination early in the season, or in fact bury some weeds and maybe aggravate weed control. So we wanted to lay that one to bed. Basically, the data collected from 3 sites over 4 years on a number of different trials has shown that there's no significant increase or decrease in annual ryegrass or wild radish populations when grazed in summer and in late summer into autumn and in winter or left ungrazed. So we looked at this a whole lot of different ways and really don't think in our environment grazing impacts on the weed situation at all. So although differences have been observed and recorded, there is no statistical significance or consistent trend as a result of grazing. Just one little trial I had going at Lake Ballarat on heavily infested ryegrass site, where I wanted to look at whether the action of a trampling hoof in the autumn would simulate that of an autumn tickle in stimulating germination, early germination. This site, half of it was fenced, as you can see, I hope, and to exclude stock, and the stock had access to the other plots. Stocked at 54 sheep per hectare for 18 days. A lot of trampling, a lot of traffic, done over 2 years, and there was no statistical impact on ryegrass numbers in the following winter. So pretty happy that really the action of a hoof is not going to impact dramatically on weed control. It's more what happens at the other end of the season. So, tactic group 2, killing weeds. This is not our work, this is a slide you've probably seen if you've done the integrated weed management courses, and it just compares different crops and their competitive value and their ability to stop weed seed reduction. So obviously barley has much stronger early growth, is much more competitive, closes canopy more quickly than wheat, for instance, and therefore is a better competitor. So what we wanted to see was, would some of our fodder species, different fodder species, behave in the same manner as this? Some of the ones we looked at, I'll just run through those pretty quickly. There's snapshots of our various trials. This one I think is at Lake Ballarat, where we can see had arrowleaf clover, balansa clover, forage oats, which that state had been cut for silage, I think. We had Crusader annual ryegrass on the left of screen, and the control is the ryegrass population that was inherent on the site on the right of screen. So as you can see, pretty dense ryegrass site. In fact, the reason we were using this site was because it had been abandoned from trial work because it had too high a ryegrass population. So it was really ideal for our work. Work down in Inverleigh, we were looking at manuring in this case, Persian clover, a nice radish plant, because the Inverleigh site had very strong radish populations. There's our grazing machine. In this trial anyhow, as you saw in the other one, we used sheep. Ceradella, Persian clover and sub-clover in its second year. So we're sowing it in the first year and then allowing it to regenerate in the second year. The Ceradella, we got the chemistry a bit wrong on that. It was our first year, and the wild radish, as you can see, has taken over on that one. We cleaned that up in the second year. Arrowleaf clover, balansa clover, lucerne on the right of screen in its first year, and TT canola in the back. So in this particular trial, we're running it over 3 years. So we would have 1 year of all these treatments, and in fact there were 90 treatments in this trial. 1 year of treatments, and then we take a third of the plots out and put in the canola. We'd run the other 2/3 for another year, and then, so it was in fodder for 2 years, and then it would go into clover, and then a third of the trial was run for 3 years in fodder, and then into canola, rather. So looking at the different fodder species over different lengths of time. Again, a few there. So, target group 2, competition. Competition from an aggressive fodder species is an effective tactic, and by aggressive we mean is strongly competitive, has early vigour, high biomass production and rapid canopy closure. And in the case of annuals or perennials, if we're using them to go on year after year, they either need to set large quantities of seed and regenerate or come out of dormancy very quickly. So what do we find with the 9 species that we had in that trial we just looked at, the 9 fodder species under control? Basically, in terms of ryegrass control, there wasn't a lot of difference between them. If you look at, for instance, the control, third line down, has had a 79% control, and you think, well, hang on, if you control, you didn't actually put any fodder species into it, how come you got almost 80% control? We applied best practice, or what we thought was best farmer practice, to each of these treatments. So in fact, that one would have been taken out for silage or hay or some other means of stopping seed set. So the bottom line on this, I guess, is it wasn't the aggressiveness of the species that provided the control in all of these. It was more the fact of how they were managed. So you can sort of get good control out of almost any of those species if you like, but it's more about how you manage them and what other end game you want to achieve. And the other end games are dry matter or the nitrogen legacy that might be left over. And you can see on the dry matter we had a range of about 1.7 tonnes to about 8.7 tonnes, and the 1.7 tonnes came off the control and the 8.7 tonnes came off the forest to forage oats. With the nitrogen legacy, if memory serves, the ryegrass had the low nitrogen of 73 kilos and the peas had the 114 kilo legacy. So I guess you then start to look at this in a system sense. If you can get pretty good weed control out of any of those forage species, then look at the other things that those forage species might give you. Just quickly looking at another trial we did at Lake Bolac, which was heavily infested with ryegrass. These is looking at the bars rather are looking at the dry matter production from 5 species in a control. And the infill is looking at the ryegrass population. So this is the first year of the trial in 2012. Not a lot of dry matter production, a lot of weeds. We run that forward 1 year. The dry matter production has increased significantly and the weed numbers have declined quite dramatically as well. Interestingly, the 2 species on the end, or the 2 crops on the end, wheat amarok and wheat revenue, in that was the first year that Sakura was released, and we were able to, or we took the view that a farmer would use Sakura IVS in that situation, so that's what we did, and that I think shows a response to that particular management practice when using those as fodder species. If you just put those together, there's a trend that's reasonably easy to envisage from the left to the right of increasing dry matter and decreasing weeds. A bit more of the theory, and again, you probably would have seen this one. If fodder species can provide competition, can sowing rate provide competition against weeds? And this is a trial again from Andrew Story's presentation on integrated weed management. We looked at increasing sowing rate and decreasing the effect, or increasing the effect on reduction of weeds. So would that translate to the same thing with fodder species? So all of those 9 fodder species that we had in those 2 trials, we sowed at what we thought was a common sowing rate, and a double sowing rate and a triple sowing rate. And I've just taken out the snapshot of the forage oats here. They all told the same story, that yes, we increased our plant numbers. No, we didn't really change our dry matter dramatically as we went up in sowing rate. And if we get to the end column, reduction in ryegrass numbers, we really didn't change very much there. And that was consistent across all that species. So unlike crop plants, it seems to be with fodder species that increasing sowing rate really doesn't increase competitiveness very much at all. And provided those plants are established properly, fertilised properly and allowed to grow properly, allowed to do what they should do, they'll provide enough competition. And increasing sowing rate probably won't help. Just a quick note, by including a range of fodder species or forage species within the rotation, it allows you to increase the scope you have for herbicide use. So we've just listed a few here, but I think it's pretty easy to sort of understand that as we go right across all those different species, it does allow us to use more. So if you're tackling a herbicide resistance problem, or you expect that one might be coming at you and you want to get in front of it a little bit, then a range of fodder species is going to help you achieve that. Tactic Group 3, stopping seed set. So this is sort of what we think is the working end of the season. You remember back to those rim model graphs. If we can stop seeds entering the seed bank and exhaust that seed bank, then it will really give us some long-term control. So stopping seed bank, as we've mentioned, relies on intercepting the seed production of weeds that have survived other attempts at control earlier in the season. The timing of the seed removal operation is more critical than the method of seed removal operation. We'll go into this in a tick. This is one of my ryegrass trials at Lake Ballarat, where we've just taken the silage cut out of it. Half of this trial was taken for silage, half was taken for hay. It really didn't make any difference in terms of weed numbers the following year, which we did. The issue was the timing of it. And if we wanted... No, I've got a slide coming up in a tick. All of these trials we followed up with a double knock strategy. So about 3 weeks after either the hay or the silage, we went back with a Roundup and put over the top of it. So trying to take those stragglers, trying to take the ryegrass plants that survived the first control strategy, making sure they don't set seed and stopping them getting into the seed bank. And we believe that's a really critical thing if you have a policy of completely stopping seed set entering the seed bank. So the sort of things we're looking at, stacking these control measures. So using that double knock principle, but using it at the end of the season, not the beginning of the season. We're looking at all of those suite of operations and trying to stack them where we can. So, for instance, with hay, it might be that you need to come back with a chemical knock a few weeks later. I mean, that can sometimes be problematic if you've got large bales still sitting in the paddock, or if your hay is delayed, or you've had misses or whatever. Silage, it might be that after the silage comes out of the paddock, very hard grazing. Crash grazing might be the double knock strategy. Green manure is just incorporation with mechanical incorporation, and we found that, I've got to say, quite difficult to do when you've got fairly high biomass of 5 or 6 tonnes, just to simply get that incorporated and kill the weeds at the same time. So we, in all cases, needed to come back with a chemical application after the green manure. I had a comment this morning earlier on about brown manure, how it's difficult to get chemical coverage, and yes, it is. We acknowledge that. So another strategy more often than not, needs to be employed in that. And grazing is a bit problematic because in large cropping paddocks, it's usually pretty difficult simply to get enough stocking pressure on to impact on seed results. Just a quick one on that. Is hay or silage better? 3 of these say it is. One's better, 3 say the others. Yep, the other's better. The bottom line is it really doesn't matter as long as you do what you do it right to stop viable seeds entering the seed bank. If you can do it with hay, and if the risks of getting a delayed cut aren't high, then hay can do it just as well as silage. This was after the hay cut in one of those trials where there's a lot of ryegrass seeds left under the hay windrow. And we thought, oops, this will be disastrous. All these seeds will germinate, and we'll be back where we started. So hay's no good. So I collected the seeds, did a germination test on them, and none of them were viable. So I think we just snuck in with this one. I'd suggest if we were a week later in our timing, then many of those seeds would have been viable. So that's our point about timing rather than the actual strategy. So, take-home messages. Grazing really, from our work, has no significant impact on weeds. Weeds can be effectively controlled by competition from aggressive fodder species, but mainly because it allows you to have management packages with different herbicide options. It's not just the fodder per se. If you cast your mind back, if you could, to that table with the different levels of ryegrass reduction from the 9 species, there were small but statistically insignificant differences in those. That was over 1 year. We're running these trials over 3 years, and it's quite possible, or probable in fact, that small difference over time will magnify or compound, and aggressive species might be a whole lot better than less aggressive species, but it's a watch this space a little bit on that one. Sowing fodder species at higher than recommended rates will not help control weeds. The commercial rates are out there, provided you get them all out of the ground and running well, fine. The timing and thoroughness of seed removal operations is more important than the method of seed removal. Timing we've talked about, thoroughness is really important, I think. I mean, the two things that drive successful cropping operations, I've always said, is timing and attention to detail. And I think I'm sure this applies to stopping seed set at the end of the year. You really need to get your timing right and be very, very thorough. Take all those little misses, all those little things that, you answered the phone while you were driving the tractor and you deviated 6 inches to one side, go back and get them, because they're going to provide the nurseries that come back to haunt you later on. And the modelling has shown that the longer the pasture phase, the greater the weed control. A combination of tactics is the best approach, and that's the fundamental of integrated weed management. I think we can skip through that one because we've probably already talked about that. We've got these trials. We're only midway through these trials, so we've got a lot of data still to collect and still to crunch. And in 1 or 2 years' time, hopefully the pictures will be a little bit clearer than they are now. And just acknowledge Corinne again for her, I was going to say, assistance in putting this together. In fact, Corinne put the thing together, so I'll acknowledge her for putting it together, and the rest of the team at Southern Farming Systems and the Grain and Graze and Pasture Crop Sequence programs. So, thank you.